Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of Couch Coding, Advanced Page Caching. Your experts for today are David Strauss and Matt Cheney, co-founders here at Pantheon. Just a few housekeeping items to go over before we start. Please make sure you submit any questions you have during the presentation in the question window. We want to answer as many of your questions as possible, so make sure you keep those coming. Also, this session will be recorded, and the recording will be made available to everyone later this week. I'd now like to turn it over to Matt and David.
Hi, page caching enthusiasts.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully this will be very fast.
So it's probably not a surprise to anyone on this call that page caching and things like edge caching are really important to running a really fast Drupal or WordPress site, because compared to things like Varnish, Drupal and WordPress just aren't that fast at generating pages real time and put a lot of load on other resources. And scaling sites up pretty much requires throwing something like that in front of it, and that's how you can deliver top 100 sites on Drupal and WordPress and on Pantheon. But traditionally, a lot of the page caching has been pretty lightweight in the sense that what we've usually done is we've usually had Drupal or WordPress deliver a page. We say for it to cache for like 5 minutes, and then we'll usually bypass the cache in something like Varnish for logged in users. And that means that people get access to fast pages for the most part, and administrators can go through the pages, edit things, and see their changes immediately. But that's not actually an ideal experience for users and for especially large sites, because pretty much your only option for freshening things is clearing the entire cache. And that is just a really heavy-handed thing, and will make pages slow for users for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about this is PHP is easy to work with because you can sort of like muck around with it, and then every time you load the page, it'll sort of rerun all of the code. But that means that like things can get sort of slow because like every single time you ask for a page, it has to rerun all of the functions and get all the databases and do all the external calls and make the HTML each time, which is an awful lot of work. Now, I mean, since a lot of us are in the services business, we bill by the hour, we do like that amount of time, but it's not the most interesting kind of things. Plus, the robots are going to do a lot of this work in the future. And I think that the way that we sort of get around this historically is sort of what David was saying, that we do this full page kind of caching. And we'll say, look, the front page of the website is rendered in the same way every time, so let's just throw it all into some sort of cache. WordPress and Drupal sort of have default kind of options where they'll just chuck that HTML into a database and then pull that out every time. But here at Pantheon, we obviously think a little bit sort of higher up the stack, and we look at Varnish as a sort of solution for that, where we'll just chuck the HTML for like the home page into Varnish, and then kick that out for everyone who needs it. But I think sort of one of the things that we're seeing here at Pantheon is as sites get more complicated, and as the needs of the sites get a little more advanced, this sort of like one big cache kind of blob option doesn't necessarily make sense, because first off, like sometimes we have more sort of granular needs, but also that when we deal with like large sites with a lot of different pages, we're going to want to have a lot more control over the individual kind of invalidation. That, this thing that like we've all done like pretty much our entire professional lives, which is clear all caches, can be an actually really dangerous thing to do on like a large traffic site. That David was sharing with me, like on some of our really high traffic sites, you actually can't and shouldn't hit that clear all cache button at all, because you clear all of the caches all at once, then the just traffic of the site is going to like really slow down the current application, because every page that's now being hit will have to be regenerated. And so a lot of, I think, some of the advanced page stuff we're working on is to allow for selective invalidation of caches, to allow for globally distribution of caches, and like ultimately to make the sites that everyone's running on Pantheon much faster. That speed matters a lot, and that having fast sites is really good for a lot of reasons.
So another aspect of caching and why invalidating everything all at once can be a problem is that your site is actually really reliant on the page cache, not just for the dynamic content, but also for a lot of the static content. Like if I take, say, Pantheon's front page here and pull up the analysis tool for the network, and then reload the page, what I do is I get this sort of waterfall thing here that shows how things are loading.
And if this isn't something you've done before, like definitely like on this call, do this to a site that you're working on. Like I think this is really helpful to understand how fast stuff loads. And also if you do it on another site, how many freaking like ad trackers exist on the internet that all these marketing people put on our pages?
So it's not just about the actual base page, which we see here hitting the cache, but it's also about all of these other requests for CSS, for JavaScript, for other assets. You can see all these different things coming from Pantheon.io, and if I clear the edge cache completely for the site, all of those things will get invalidated, and then every subsequent page load until the cache gets repopulated will be having to hit the origin. So we really want to avoid that. It's sometimes necessary to clear the whole cache, but we don't want it to be the standard practice. So that brings up is there a way I can get an image onto your screen? I emailed it to your work account, but I'm not sure if there's a best way to.
Oh, to get an image up?
Yeah. So we have we also have some interesting graphics from one of our power users on how their page load times got affected by implementing high hit rate caches that were well distributed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we could probably work that out. One of the things that I think is really helpful in performance is to get really good sort of data visualizations of the different things.
And you can see also a lot of visualization for this sort of thing by going into the new Relic console via the Pantheon dashboard, and there's a front-end analytics tool that basically puts a little bit of JavaScript on the page that analyzes the page load times on different devices for all the media assets, and just basically shows you the time to render and what things, what requests the page loads generally wait on.
And I think for folks who are sort of doing like support business, where maybe you have customers that are paying you monthly or yearly to sort of manage their sites, I think a really good kind of sort of task that you can do is you can sort of do additional caching and performance optimizations to those sites. And as one of the sort of assets that you can actually show off, you can basically show them a graph of sort of before or after you're doing an individual optimization, and be able to sort of say, hey, look, we did this kind of thing. Here's the sort of improvement, because that's relatively tangible kind of information. So I'll go ahead and bring up this graphic, which we've put in the Hack the Planet channel over here.
Mm-hmm. So this is showing not only a setup that is effectively using edge caching, but it's also a setup that's using the next generation edge that's coming to Pantheon and is available on a lot of sites. And for people on this call, which is kind of, I think, a good deal overlapped with our power users group, we're happy to enable this as early access for anyone. It's not really in beta anymore. We're just gradually rolling it out to sites on the platform. And this basically puts the caching not only at a high hit rate for the site, but it also pushes the caches to points of presence around the world so that it's close to the users as well. So it's hitting this kind of trifecta of security with HTTPS and caches close to users with a CDN foundation, and what we're talking about today, which is high hit rates with selective cache invalidation, because all of these things for caching are not useful if you don't get the hit rate up.
And I mean, this is a pretty big deal. It's something that we were talking up at DrupalCon Baltimore recently, and then at WordCamp Europe and Paris last week. That historically, the way a lot of people have sort of done even their best practice caching is that you'll have a server, or you'll have like a Pantheon platform, and at that origin there'll be a cache like Varnish, and so all the requests go to that origin. They like get the cache response, and then they go back to the local stuff. But the thing we're rolling out is going to not only have one origin, or it'll have an origin, but there'll be dozens or maybe even hundreds of points of presence all around the world. So wherever you're connecting to try to get the website information, the cache will be in a very localized way. You won't have to leave your country or your, even in some cases, city to get all of the assets. And this like dramatically speeds up because you can see all of the different things that have to be downloaded from the site. It's not just like one file that you have to download a website, as of course all of you know, but there's a ton of different files, and the closer those are to you, just the faster overall all of this is going to work, and that's really a big deal.
So before getting into how to deal with this manually in terms of tagging pages and invalidating specific sets of content, we'll show one of the out-of-the-box things that we have. This one is currently released for WordPress, and we are working on one for Drupal as well, for Drupal 8. The WordPress one here, it's just a WordPress plugin called Pantheon Advanced Page Cache. If you're on Pantheon, all you have to do is install this plugin and enable it, and that's pretty much it. There are one or two things you can configure on it, but you don't have to. Otherwise, it just works.
And I think this is something that we'll be recommending that everybody run on all of your WordPress sites on the platform. That this is something that will allow you to, as Dave will show off, a lot of different things. But if you're running, for example, a custom upstream on Pantheon using WordPress, this is a really good plugin to put into that so you have it available for all of your sites. As it says in the description, it is the golden ticket, and we all want golden tickets. We can go into the candy shop and watch Veruca Salt turn into a blueberry.
So I have a test site set up here where I've added a domain name to it with that next generation stuff, which is now here on the dashboard. I'm logged in as an admin on the site. I've uploaded the code, but the only thing I've done on this WordPress site other than install it and uploading this code is removing some extraneous plugins that aren't necessary for the demo. But so all I really have to do on a Pantheon site is click activate on this. And then if I go to pages here, now if I go to this sample page, and if I open it up, and hop over to a different browser so that I can get a non-logged in experience. Do you know how to pull up the dev console one here? On Safari?
Oh, probably.
I can try the usual. Whoops, not.
Whoa. That's the California coast right there. It's a great screensaver. I don't know actually.
So I can do it from the shell as well.
Yes. So you can also turn on plugins, of course, from the shell. The WP CLI is a really great technology. If you haven't played around with it in the WordPress world, definitely check it out. You can activate stuff and have a really good time from there.
So basically what I want to show is that, whoops, how do I go to the beginning of the line? Sorry, I'm on a Mac. I'm not used to that.
Mac's very easy to use, David.
So what I'm going to do here is request this article. And I like to use curl with -v and then send the output to dev null because then it makes a normal GET request. So what I can see in here is that for this piece of content, I now have this thing on here, surrogate key raw. The reason why it's called surrogate key raw is that because Pantheon runs hundreds of thousands of sites and we need to track invalidation keys across all the sites, what we do is we combine it cryptographically with a value on the back end while processing, and then change the keys into secure hashes of the keys that have been sent for the page. And then those keys are not really human readable. You actually can't see them here, and you never really need to see them, but they're basically random alphanumerics, and that allows us to invalidate keys, specific keys for specific sites across all sites, without having any kind of overlap where, like, if someone tried to invalidate post 2 on one website, the yes. Just getting that feedback from Atusa. It's actually already in incognito mode to answer that question. Opening a second incognito mode window just ends up doing the same session, so it would still be logged in. So if I clear post 2 from this website, it will only clear it for this specific site and environment, which is the live site for this selective invalidation test site that I've created. But for development purposes, it's really useful to see what keys got sent along with the page. So we send a header called surrogate key raw that contains the unprocessed keys for the page, so you can see what keys you're setting. And you never have to really worry about or think about the processed versions of it. We just do that all in the background to be able to manage this sort of unified edge for the properties on Pantheon. But what this means is now this page of the site is possible to purge for if post 2, post user 1, or single get purged on the back end. So
like post user 1, that could be like the user profile information for that user on WordPress. If they change their picture or something, then that would change the key.
Yep. And then if I load this page again, you can see now that the age is 160, which means I'm getting a cached version of the page that has spent a little bit of time in the cache. By default, the advanced page cache tool has a 10-minute TTL, but you can change that. This is literally the only 2 configuration options, is to clear the cache and to set the general page lifetime. But we can actually make this a really long time because we don't actually have to worry about things getting stale. I can set it to an entire day here. And now when I load this page, well, it's still the old copy, but as soon as it, it got the new, oh no, that's the content link. As soon as it gets the new copy of it after the 10 minutes, it will be using this really long lifetime. But in order to show the selective invalidation, it's not very useful to have one piece of content on the site.
For the TTL, the time to live, like what is a good sort of default for a site? Like if I'm setting up a normal site, how long should I do it? 10 minutes or should I do it a day?
10 minutes is actually pretty okay. That means that if something doesn't get invalidated properly, that it will not be stale for more than 10 minutes. But the real advantage of using these longer times is for really high traffic sites, so that individual pieces of content can almost always hit the edge cache, because the way that things propagate on this next generation edge on Pantheon with the CDN foundation, and on really any CDN that uses a proxy model like Cloudflare or Fastly, or a lot of the more modern CDNs other than that as well, is that they basically have these points of presence located around the world, and then when a copy of the page goes through that cache, it holds on to it. But it doesn't replicate the cache usually on its own. So if someone is only infrequently visiting from a region, or people are only infrequently visiting from a region, having a much longer cache time means it's much more likely that they'll have a copy of that content on that cache that's local to them.
Because like the TTL, that's per like cache server or for like the entire.
It's for so the way that cache servers work with the HTTP spec for holding on to a copy of the page is what they do is it's designed to be stacked so that you can have multiple caches, because traditionally caching for HTTP was more for forward proxies, which are like things for like an office, rather than reverse proxies, which are things like CDNs and Varnish, and for older installations, Squid. What they basically do is they look at this cache control header, and assuming it's public, they look at the max age, and then a cache will look at the age down here, and it will subtract it and see how much longer it can hold on to it. So I could have a cache in front of this that gets a copy of this page, and or just my browser, which also has its own built-in caching, and it would say I can hold on to this for about 400 seconds past this point. And what it'll do is it'll cache it with this age, and it will continue to bump that up. So no matter how many caches you stack, the page should never actually be more than the max age stale from the origin. And CDNs use this property too, especially the way that we're doing this infrastructure at Pantheon, where it's a stacked thing with a cluster of caches near the origin data center and points of presence around the world. So one of the big benefits of using that long max age is that if people are only visiting the site infrequently in a region, it's likely to hold on to a copy of it, because with a 10-minute TTL on this, or max age on this, it will only hit the cache in a region if someone has visited that page in the last 10 minutes in that region. So that's why something like a long TTL, like a day, can be beneficial for a sort of global audience on a site.
Yeah, because the first time they hit it, it's going to be their first experience in many cases on the site, and there's a lot of very legitimate research around sort of user behavior, and people are pretty fickle, and stuff takes even a couple seconds to load. Like, people will totally tune it out and close their browser or move on to something else. And the faster that your pages are, the more people will simply stick around and the more content they'll consume. And that's even more true on mobile, like tablet and cell phone devices. And so if you're working with clients and customers that are very interested in having like good analytics and people sticking around and really having good experiences, the faster you can make their initial first-time experience, the better. And having something that lives in the cache for a long time is really excellent. I think the one thing I maybe would ask David is, so like, it looks like if this works as intended, that you could set a 10-year time to live, because it presumably will invalidate the stuff that needs to be invalidated on demand. When does that break down? Like, when would you expect it to not have a problem with the caching?
It's really only an issue if the selective invalidation isn't done properly. And this is why if you do it manually, it's something that it might be worth ramping up those times over time and seeing if anyone notices stale content. Because what will happen is that if you have a relatively short TTL, like 10 minutes, then no mistake in invalidation is going to be cause worse than 10 minutes of problems on the site. Whereas if you do a day or a week or a month, then you could very well end up with issues if you're not actually properly invalidating stuff, where you could end up with some really stale content.
That's maybe an example of how that could sort of go awry. So if you're just using stock WordPress or stock Drupal to do a lot of this stuff, the cache tags and the validation should all work fine. But maybe if you did some custom thing where you had at the bottom of the post in the template, you had some sort of related posts, or you had some pulled profile information directly from the database or something. If you're not using the sort of standard ways to load content, then maybe that could cause some problems.
Yeah, it certainly could, because this sort of plugin for WordPress is designed to work with the common cases of pages and posts and user profiles and comments and category pages. And with that, if you do substantially unusual custom stuff, like let's say you edited a theme and pulled in some content that isn't typical to include on a page. Let's say you took a category page and started including some of the major users who have written posts in that category as part of the theme. The advanced page cache extension or module here would be unaware of the fact that you were including that content. And then you would actually have to start looking at some of these other things here that are on here where you can actually add additional keys to the content, where if you were adding content to a page manually in a way like with the theme, you would have to let the system know, by the way, I'm including these user profiles on this page.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I don't think neither David or I are under any illusions that, I mean, cache invalidation is a hard problem, you know, all across computers. And I don't think, you know, it's going to be ever 100% solved in any discipline. But I think one of the things that we're really trying to move forward with this plugin is to have a situation where you really shouldn't have your sort of logged in, you know, your uncached version be different than your cache version. That, like, if this all works as expected, that as soon as you hit save on a post, then every place that post is referenced, those will be invalidated, and you can just refresh on an uncached version and get the latest stuff. So, well, that's the dream. Now, you may not totally get there, but that's increasingly the world we're trying to get you to.
Mm-hmm. And while I was mentioning how with a CDN, the replication to the points of presence around the world is often done in a lazy fashion, to use a technical term for it. I mean, that is kind of the computer science term in the sense of it's replicated when it's needed in a region. That's not the way that invalidation happens. Invalidation gets replicated all around the world nearly instantaneously, like way less than a second, to all of the points of presence around the world. But enough about that. I'd love to kind of show off this demo. So this page now has aged enough that it was older than 10 minutes, so it got and fetched a new copy. We can now see that it now has a 1-day expiration time.
Oh, yeah, nice.
So, and if I continue to query this, like, I'd be getting just ever-increasing age values until way after this webinar is actually over. And if I go to this thing here and I reload this page, all these assets are coming from the local point of presence now. And in fact, you can see the route that it's taking. This is going through San Jose and then Chicago for this particular page in terms of the caches.
I feel sorry for it. It has to go through San Jose. We love San Jose, 10th biggest city in the U.S. Great hockey team.
It's a clear community. It has nothing to do with San Jose.
But let's say I had these pages are a good example of selective invalidation, because posts on a site, you might update them a few times, but often blogs kind of have posts and then they just stick there. But pages typically get refreshed on a regular basis. WordPress ships with one sample page. I've already loaded that here and pulled it down in the cache here. And as we can see, in fact, I will. My shell foo is not quite good enough to send the errors.
Here's a question, David. If I did what you just did and set my TTL to like a day.
Yep.
And then I'm like, oh, I want to change that. Can I change that like now? Could I like put it back to an hour, or am I stuck with the day?
Well, all the content that's cached already will not pick up the new lower duration. The only way to really put in place a lower duration and draw it back is to put in place that lower duration. I could go to the Pantheon page cache here. I could take this, I could roll this back to, let's say I just want to do 20 minutes now. If I go over to this, I'm still going to see this thing with the 86400 because I delivered a page to the CDN telling it that it can keep it for 24 hours. And it's not going to be checking back with me until those 24 hours are up. But what I can do is I can go in here and clear the cache, and then go back here and pull it again. And now it's going to have my new max age because I've cleared everything in my edge. But the only way to really roll back the times is to clear everything, because that's an explicit request to just clear everything.
Right.
The other thing is, so if you make a mistake, it's totally recoverable, especially if you're at a lower traffic time or you just don't have a massive traffic site. And by massive traffic, I mean like a top 100 kind of site. But in general, you should be able to use really long times with this sort of selective invalidation. So if I go back here, I'm still going to have my 20-minute copy because that was the last one that was delivered here. Just to make everything consistent, I will clear the edge one more time and bring it back up to the 24 hours. So now I have the 86400 again. I can go over to my pages here. That is the first time that thing loaded. I can load it again and see that I have an aged copy here. It's still really fresh compared to the max age. But I can go into this page now. And just to also compare with another page, I'm going to load the front page and get that in the cache too.
Cache it all, cache it all.
So now the front page is a hit.
And this works for like the assets too, right? If I have like an image on the page, it's going to work the same way.
The images generally are not subjected to this sort of labeling because this labeling gets done at the PHP layer. It's generally assumed that images keep the same content unless the name changes. So usually the best way to work with long cache times with images is to upload a new image and replace that content, because that will be at a new URL, and then because the page will get invalidated and it will refer to a new piece of content, then it will load the updated graphic. Alternatively, it's possible with media to do a wider spread clearing of the cache. We could look at long-term doing something where we label the media in various ways that WordPress might be aware of with this sort of stuff, but that would have to be very platform specific because the media doesn't go through PHP.
I just know I've had some trouble where I've like had images that are part of my theme, and when I push and I'll just replace the images on there because like I've already got it like dialed to the CSS, and those are things where I typically have to like do a full cache clear to get that to work.
If you change the theme, you almost always have to do a full cache clear because generally you're not going to tag things based on what parts of the theme they're using, because theme changes are generally more of a deployment style change rather than a content change. And a theme change could very well affect every single page of the site. So here I have my sample page now cached for almost more than 2 minutes, and I have the front page of the site now cached for just over a minute. But I can go in here and I can change this content. Let's say I just want to strip this down to basics, and now I can click update on here. So that updates the page there. So the front page of the site gets invalidated because it has the I think it actually has that content on it, but it also invalidates this page 2 here. So now you can see that I'm getting a fresh page even though I told the thing to save it for 24 hours. But if, let's say, I add a second page on here,
and we're really sorry for showing you this like standard WYSIWYG with this new WordPress Gutenberg editor coming out, because the new editor is really awesome, and we probably should do a couch coding on that in the future, getting rid of the TinyMC and having like an actual component-based build process. There was a lot of good buzz at the WordCamp Europe last week about that, but should all work the same way for caching.
Yep. So I'll throw another page on here. So what you can see here is you see post 5, post user 1, and single, which is like I think single page, like single post at a time. And then you have sample page on here, which shows post 2, post user 1, and single page. Oh. So now I have so for my sample page, I have just over a minute of cache on that, and almost 30 seconds of cache on my second page, another page. But I can go back, I can edit this another page, and I can say more content.
More.
Did you want me to use MOAR or?
I would have only have used MOAR.
Well, because we have selective cache invalidation, we can efficiently change that piece of content. So my sample page, though, still is keeping its cached copy around, because changing another page has no effect on my first sample page of content. Sure. And so that one continues to be available to users. If it's replicated to points of presence around the world, that's still going to be there. But for another page, I now have a fresh cache item, age of 0. So even though I'm using these super long retention times, because I'm able to selectively invalidate parts of the cache, when I change pieces of content, I'm able to keep things around for really long times and then only send them, and this basically sends a message out to the CDN whenever these pieces of content change. And this works for categories, for posts, for the front page of the site. It's generally well integrated with WordPress. Part of why we've done this with WordPress first is WordPress has just more rigid assumptions about the sort of content that people work with, that is pretty much pages, posts, categories, and a front page, whereas Drupal has a pretty wide variation with everything from views to panels or equivalent to taxonomies to all of these extensions that people are using with Drupal that are putting content on pages in ways that may or may not be easy to categorically integrate with this sort of tagging of the content with the keys.
I think that's awesome. I think getting this invalidation stuff dialed definitely makes a lot of sense for a lot of sites. But like, what if I need to clear stuff that doesn't have sort of this default process? What if I want to like manually clear a page?
I'm glad you've asked, Matt. It's a two-part thing because unlike the old URL sort of methods of clearing, where you basically made sure that the URL had various attributes of it that would match some sort of pattern for clearing, what you do here is totally behind the scenes. It doesn't have to affect the path of the page. So what you do is you can do a thing on here where here's an example as part of the documentation for the advanced page cache, where you're able to add a key for a page. It's this this add filter for main query surrogate keys, and then you add by doing this add filter thing, the advanced page cache calls into this. This returns a key if you're on the home page, and then you will see that output on surrogate key raw when you're actually loading the headers for the page. But that's not the end of it. That's just labeling the page for how you want it to be grouped. And you can do that for as many pages as you want for a given key. And any given page can have up to at least a few hundred keys on it without having any serious effect on end users, because it's not really something that end users have to, their browsers have to deal with. And then the kind of counterpart of that is that you make a call to Pantheon WP clear edge keys, and you give it an array of the keys you want to actually invalidate. And this is all integrated via the platform with the CDN and the keying of the pages, so that this is literally all you have to do for a WordPress site on Pantheon to get this all working, is to just label the keys on the pages that you want them to have, and then when something changes that falls under that key, you have to call this function. And this function will return extremely quickly because it is all these invalidations are getting synchronized out to these points of presence asynchronously. It's sort of a fire and forget sort of thing, where this will return in only a tiny fraction of a second, and then everything will be invalidated worldwide within less than a second.
And where does that function live? Is that like in my WordPress code or upstream, or?
This is a function provided by the Advanced Page Cache plugin.
Okay. Is there a version of it for Drupal?
So by diving into the internals of the Advanced Page Cache plugin, that's probably the best way to see how to do this from Drupal, because nothing actually stops you from doing this on any site on Pantheon. Drupal, WordPress, even the cowboys and cowgirls out there just doing raw PHP on the platform or with a framework and just kind of shoehorning stuff in there. So the only things you have to do to get the surrogate key stuff to work, because it's basically a standard in terms of how you label that content, is first of all, you have to set a surrogate key header, which it's literally just a header called surrogate-key. You don't want to set surrogate key raw, because that is just showing you, for debugging purposes, what the keys look like. In PHP, this would, just to this would be, I mean, you can call Drupal's function as well, but it's this is like the raw thing that you actually want to accomplish is something like that, where you basically have a space-separated set of the keys that are going out with that content. And this needs to vary based on what content is on the page. So you would want to do something where if it's loading, you would probably want to have something, I mean, in the Drupal world, something like node 56, user 23, or term 37. That's the sort of way that you would label the content on the page. I think Drupal 8 may actually include some of these already out of the box.
Yeah.
And you can exploit those if you want to.
And so the magic function here is Pantheon _ clear _ edge _ keys.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that function live?
That is defined for all Pantheon sites. That is defined as part of the prepend PHP that gets loaded for all PHP on the platform. The reason you would want to probably have a guard like function exists is that if you do any local development or on any boxes that are not on Pantheon itself, this function will not be defined.
So yeah, I mean, that's something that maybe a lot of you actually don't know because it's sort of, not public. So like you have your WordPress site or your Drupal site, and that when you run that, obviously we include all that code. But then we have some separate file called Pantheon prepend.php that we also include that has a series of internal functions that we use on the platform. This is one of those functions, but you can reference it in like a pattern like this to call it yourself. Then the reason why we have it is that it's sort of complicated and it uses your specific keys, right?
Well, it does there's actually a lot happening in the background, because what it does is it uses the certificate that we deploy as part of the public key infrastructure to the platform. It uses the certificate in the container to then talk to the cache clearing API, which then converts the keys specified here to the cryptographically hashed version that is known by the CDN layer, and then it submits that as a cache invalidation request to the CDN. So you would specify the same clear text key here that you would when setting the surrogate key for the page, the header. You don't have to worry about the way that we're converting them. We'll automatically convert it here for the invalidation request, and we automatically convert them as they go through the edge. So you just have to work with the plain text surrogate key header and a function call like this. And this will automatically target either the old edge or the next generation edge as your site uses it. And you don't have to change your code at all.
That's great.
And this is available for all sites on the platform, at least right now for all plan levels.
Yeah, well, seems like all sites could certainly take advantage of this kind of stuff. Well, awesome. I think it's really cool. I definitely learned some things here. The manual clearing is something that I definitely get asked a fair bit about as well. So I think that's nice to have a good sort of story there.
There's also a thing on here for clear edge paths, and that requires a full path. You cannot use it for a pattern. We got rid of the cache patterns for paths because they operate really slowly, because they were usually something like a regex that would have to walk through the whole cache. But here, this allows you to invalidate a specific URI. The plugin here actually makes that available. If you visit as a logged in user, you will have clear URL cache for the current URL.
Oh, cool.
So you can manually invalidate a current URL on the site by just going to it and clicking that, and that calls this thing here.
So if I've made a custom page like /dashboard or something,
mm-hmm.
and I want to, clear that dashboard for people, in my custom code I could just call Pantheon clear edge paths and include the full URL path to that, and then it'll just clear the dashboard from whatever in the code pathway that is executed.
I still think it'd probably be easier to do the keys, because with paths it's easy to get it wrong in the sense of is the host name included in the path, is the / included in the path. I think the answer in this case is the first / is included in the host name and other parts of the URL are not. And also, if there are any kind of things that you might change on the page, like let's say you have a query string where you have like a question mark and like content equals this or region equals that, you might have something where the URL would not necessarily literally be the exact URL you expect. And by using the keys, you would always be able to clear any instance of the dashboard, no matter what things are changed in the URL. And it's very easy to know that, like, when I set key XYZ, I can clear key XYZ, and I don't have to worry about anything weird happening.
Can I clear someone else's URL?
You cannot.
No.
This is all. So the way we actually do paths is we actually still use the surrogate key system. For every given page on the site, we generate 2 additional surrogate keys, regardless of whether the page specifies any. One is for the entire site plus environment, which is for the live environment of this selective invalidation site. And then when you actually do a clear all, like down here, you can see a call to Pantheon clear edge all.
Yeah.
That actually clears a key that we set for every single page of the site, every single URL on the site, even for media. And then we mux it the same way with that cryptographic hash. And the same thing for paths. Actually, every path of the site actually gets turned into a surrogate key that gets embedded into the CDN data. And then when you request to clear a path, we actually convert that to the key that we would have assigned for that path. So actually, all of these things use the key system. It's just that there are various levels of abstraction around it.
Awesome.
Alrighty, we have about 10 minutes to get some of your questions answered, so feel free to submit those now. Our first one, we may have covered this, but just to review, was I'd like to find out how to refresh cache for views after content has changed. Even if set to 1 minute, that can get frustrating for content editors.
So is this for the views internal cache? I'll just answer for both questions.
Yeah.
So if it's for the views internal cache, that would be object caching with Drupal, and that's a totally different cache than the one that we're covering right now, in the sense that that would be something like the database or Redis, and that's entirely internally handled by Drupal. And I don't have a great answer for that, although you can reduce those cache times to smaller levels. I think there might even be a way to have it skip the cache for content editors, but I'm not an expert on that particular cache. The in terms of caching a view from the front-end side, content editors should not have to see page cached views, because content editors are generally logged-in users, and at least right now, the standard way that Drupal gets deployed on Pantheon, and in most cases, is that when someone has a session and they're a logged-in user, then they bypass the page cache and they should see the updated view. So the stale views that you're probably seeing are probably from the internal caching of Drupal, which wouldn't be part of all of the selective invalidation for pages.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of caches on the site. There's this cache, there's internal views cache, there's Redis cache, there's APC cache.
Yeah, and I think Views uses the internal Drupal cache, which would be Redis if you have the Redis module installed on Pantheon.
All right, next question is, earlier you mentioned Drupal 8. What is available for or planned for Drupal 7?
I don't think that we have anything planned for Drupal 7 right now, because most sites that are using or will launch with Drupal 7 have probably launched with Drupal 7. There are not a lot of new projects that are in the works that I've seen. And honestly, like what we've done before this has worked so far, in the sense of we've managed to get all of this to work for sites, albeit with sometimes some workarounds. If you really, really need this with Drupal 7, you can totally do this. Like, nothing stops you from doing setting surrogate keys and then calling these functions for clear edge keys for a Drupal 7 site. In fact, patch.com, which is one of the largest sites on Pantheon's platform, is using this with Drupal 7 for their stuff. It's particularly useful if you have like a headless kind of setup, because if you have an API on the back end, or you have a front end that you've really managed carefully in terms of exactly what pages get rendered, it's pretty easy to know what keys to set. Another way to look at it is you can translate from the old URL pattern style invalidation to keys, where you could set up a rule in settings.php where if a path matches a certain pattern, then you can set a key for it, and then you know that you can invalidate that key later. So you can kind of do it out of band from Drupal for your content. You would just need to hook into something like hook node save, and then say, okay, well, I'll invalidate the surrogate key for this node.
Yeah, I think for Drupal 7, so all of this global CDN stuff we're talking about, that's available for Drupal 7. Your site will become faster simply by using that. Your current way of just like having the pages like live in cache for 10 minutes will, of course, as worked so far, that will sort of get you a certain level. And then I think, as David was saying, if you have selective invalidation needs, you can call some of these functions here, Pantheon edge cache clear keys or path clear, and do that in like a node submit or a views change or these other kind of operations to clear more selectively as needed.
And just a note, if you go to drupal.org/projects/d8 cache, that's the Drupal 7 module that backported the d8 cache tag functionality. And there's a Pantheon integration module that will be released this summer.
Oh, great.
According to our own Steve version.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, we're hedging that bet because today's the first day of summer, so like.
Well, we're in San Francisco, so summer comes in the fall here.
All right, great. We're going to move on to the next one. This is a question about security, prompted by the example of using user 21 in the surrogate key example. Can a malicious user fiddle with the surrogate key header and retrieve cached content for a different logged-in user?
So surrogate key is something returned from the backend, not as part of the request. It is merely informing the CDN or other reverse proxy cache what is the what tags are keys to put on that page. It doesn't change anything about how people can request pages, so it shouldn't introduce any security complexity for the site. Nor does this allow anyone to invalidate the cache as a user of the site, even for specific keys. I mean, other than a side effect, if someone edits their user profile, the site will probably invalidate things for their user.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a sort of clever thing to think about. I think I think sometimes if you implement your own sort of custom caching, you do got to be careful that you have the same kind of security on accessing the cached information as you do on accessing the uncached information, because they're both obviously sort of sensitive.
All right, our next question is, wouldn't you just get that stuff for free with D8's new cache tags?
Well, D8, it's not, the microphone's not plugged in.
Okay.
It's now saying I'm having a network connection issue. There.
All right, I think we're okay. Sorry, we dropped our microphone. We were very excited about the caching. Yeah, I would say, so you get a lot of the cache tag management for free with Drupal 8, and with this backport for Drupal 7 with the cache tags, you get it as well. That was one of the things that I was very excited about with Drupal 8, that it was trying to be more aware of how what content was sort of marshaled for each page, and that's sort of what the cache tags has done. And if you use Drupal 8 sort of without anything worth showing off, if you're just using Drupal 8 normally, you actually get this kind of cache invalidation stuff as well happening just for like the normal page cache. And I think that's very exciting. I think one of the things, though, you'll sort of run into if you sort of get into the guts of using Drupal 8 and you start doing a lot of custom sort of content management and content sort of creation as part of your different modules and themes, is that sometimes the cache tags aren't going to entirely line up with the content you have on the page. And you may need to do some custom clearing to sort of make it all work.
Yep, because Drupal 8 certainly won't actually invalidate the tags for you, for the keys, because it isn't aware of the CDN layer on its own.
Well, we'll write an integration module.
But that is where the integration will take over. In fact, it should be, at least the basics with Drupal 8 should be easier to do than with WordPress in the sense of using the built-in keys for the content. It's just that Drupal may have far more edge cases, and we wanted to start with something that would be likely to have people see success out of the box.
Yeah, and WordPress will have plenty of edge cases too, of course. We just, it's all sort of improvements as we go.
Alrighty, our next question is following on the Drupal train. So for a Drupal site, is anything needed to make use of the edge cache aside from sending the surrogate keys header?
So sending to make you, can you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah. So for a Drupal site, is anything needed to make use of the edge cache aside from sending the surrogate keys header?
So the edge cache will be in use even if you don't send a surrogate key header. It just will be in a much more basic way that is sort of full site caching with full site invalidation when you say click the dashboard to clear caches. Sending the surrogate key header will help the cache understand how the content is segmented on the site, but it will not know when to clear it because the CDN does not know when you've made changes to the site. All it knows is that it's gotten a copy of content. It knows how long it can hold on to it and reuse it, and it knows what keys are set to it for later invalidation. But it still needs to know what things to change. Imagine if you had a huge kind of bulletin board at the front of a department and you had different flyers on it. The flyers might be from different for different classes in the department, and you might say on a flyer like keep posted until this certain date. But it could be that one of the flyers needs to change before that date has occurred. Like maybe it was class syllabus and it changed way before the end of the semester, and you want to update it on the billboard. You might tell someone managing the billboard for the department, I need you to remove all the flyers for sociology 101 at the front of the department bulletin board. And they would know how to remove it because otherwise they're just going to leave it up there until the expiration, like the end of the semester. So surrogate keys provide an explicit way to basically label the content on that sort of bulletin board that's managed by a different party and allow you to provide instructions. But it's not enough to just label it. Like even if someone puts up that syllabus and it's labeled Sociology 101 on the bulletin board, and I change the syllabus on my computer, the person who manages the bulletin board will still not know that that I've changed the syllabus. I still need to send them an email telling them I need you to remove these things from the bulletin board. And that is essentially what happens when you do the Pantheon clear edge keys. It is essentially sending an instruction that you want it to remove this stuff stored elsewhere that matches a certain set of classifications.
All right, I'm going to see two more questions in here. This next one is, can you talk about Drupal 8 REST API and caching?
So surrogate key stuff is actually nowhere more interesting than with APIs, because APIs are often used for one of two kind of different use cases. One is sort of the headless sort of setup, where you have a front end and you're querying the content from a back-end site, and you're assembling a bunch of content on the site and pulling together these different assets with those API calls. And another one is where the API is more publicly accessible, where let's say you have an app for browsing your site, and you want people to have a native experience in iOS and Android and to be able to see that content. Those are pulling up something like with the REST API on either WordPress or Drupal. And WordPress actually, as of 4.7, is now shipping with a REST API out of the box. And Drupal 8 is the first version of Drupal that's sort of more API first, in the sense that all of the major entity management features were built with an API shipping out of the box. And so never has this been a more interesting thing about like the API for the content. But part of the issue with APIs is that because people often programmatically rely on them, where they load an API call, and they get a JSON object, and they get a content value out of that object, and they want to look up, say, the user profile for the author of that content. You often have a more stringent environment for the freshness of the stuff. Like, if you had a user page that was 404'd and cached for that author that just got created for a new piece of content, you wouldn't want to have a situation where someone loaded a piece of content and then one of the other data items referenced by that piece of content isn't fresh or correct or available. So you actually have, in some ways, tighter constraints for working with APIs. And so a selective invalidation is really, really valuable for APIs because it allows you to actually ensure that the API is kept fresh and that you have a high hit rate with the content.
Okay, we're going to get one more in here. I think this would be an interesting note to end it on. It says, apologies if this has already been addressed, but how does CDN-style distributed caching at the Pantheon level interact with Cloudflare or other CDN fronting the site? Obviously, it'll get the HTML that Cloudflare doesn't cache closer to the end user, but will it help much with the static assets that Cloudflare is already performing as a CDN for?
So it won't do a whole lot for the static assets because, in general, the static assets are not getting as much of this kind of surrogate key style invalidation. What the Pantheon integrated stuff will do is it will work a lot better for this sort of surrogate key stuff for actual content pages, because it's actually really difficult to set this all up on your own. If you did this all on your own, what you'd have to do is get something like your own Cloudflare or Fastly account, and then you would have to get an API key for that, and then you'd have to plug that API key into the website, and you would have to have the appropriate plan level to support that kind of thing. Like, I don't know if Cloudflare's basic stuff supports that. And Fastly's plans that provide, say, HTTPS, which is kind of an almost requirement on the internet today, start at hundreds a month. So it's kind of cost prohibitive. It's kind of setup prohibitive. And then you would want to have an isolated environment for every single one of your dev environments too. Like, you'd want to have at least a test environment, a dev environment. You'd want the keys for those to be separate because you don't want it where you edit node 1 on your dev environment and it invalidates node 1 on your live environment. So you'd have to do all of those things in order to get that same level of integration. As a value add, I'm not sure there's much value in stacking Cloudflare on top of the next generation edge stuff from Pantheon because it already provides POPs around the world, and it's integrated with all this invalidation stuff on the platform, which stacking Cloudflare in front of it would not be unless you manually did it. But it will work. You can put Cloudflare or another CDN in front of even this new edge, CDN-based edge. It just doesn't provide as much marginal value as it used to.
Nice.
Alrighty, guys, that is all we have time for today. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, please visit our website where you'll find a Contact Us page, and we'll put you in touch with the best member of our team. Have a great week, everyone, and be sure to join us for our next edition of Couch Coding. Thank you, David and Matt.